make sure to follow us on Instagram at Whistlethrowers. It's a great way to interact with our show. Our DMs are always open for questions, topic discussions, and more. You will be able to find our new episodes and other announcements there.
But the fact that the bench only scored outside of Lowry 4 points is ridiculous.
Thanks for tuning back into the Whistlethrowers podcast. This is Jack Slaymaker, joined by
Jack Mubarak
and Aiden Tiksinski.
And so this is recorded on April 11th, about 10:15 p.m. The first of the play-in games concluded. It was the Atlanta Hawks versus the Miami Heat. Sort of surprisingly, probably to the majority of NBA fans, the Hawks beat the Heat on the road by 11 points. The score is probably a little closer than the entirety of the game was. Atlanta controlled a large majority of the game. Atlanta was in supreme control. They dominated the glass. They were shooting really well. They weren't really turning Miami over. Miami had less turnovers than the Hawks, but Atlanta was still pretty stifling on defense. They held the Heat to 43% shooting, 32% from three. The Heat didn't get to the free throw line probably as much as they wanted to. Just looking at the box score too, Bam Adebayo just had a really empty game, and it doesn't help that guys on the other end for Atlanta were playing better against him, like Onyeka Okongwu really had his number tonight. John Collins had a decent game. They weren't necessarily stat sheet stuffers, but they just did a lot to impact the game. And the glaring thing to me is how small Bam Adebayo came up in this game. And for the Heat, that's a key player for you, a guy that you're paying a lot of money, and he probably wants to look for more even. But games like this make you nervous about doing that. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So, I just want to touch on Kyle Lowry's performance because he was the only guy stopping them from losing by 25 minimum. That whole night, there was no offense. Jimmy didn't do terrible, but it wasn't the playoff Jimmy we know, like where he takes over a game. Yeah, I was very surprised. I thought the Heat had this in the bag, but it was a full team effort by the Atlanta Hawks. I said it this time, not the fucking Falcons. There's too many birds in Atlanta. But yeah, they were getting so many offensive boards over the Heat, and that's been a very small team since they've been in contention for the East in the Jimmy Butler era. That's been my main critique of this team, and I didn't think they would get exposed like this fast into the postseason, if we can even call this the postseason right here.
What's shocking to me is how poorly the bench shot the ball. The fact that Kevin Love, so to start off, the Hawks bench played phenomenally. Everyone that played off the bench got 10 points or more, which is just ridiculous. Sadiq Bey getting 17. I don't think that most people imagined he would be the leading scorer off the bench for the Hawks. What shocked me is how few minutes the guys for the Heat played off the bench. I understand they were down by a lot at certain points, but the fact that Oladipo only played 9 minutes, Cody Zeller only played 3, Kevin Love only played 3, you can't play that few minutes off the bench in the playoffs. Your starters are going to get worn out, which seemed to be what happened in this game. And if they're not shooting well, which a lot of the stars were, you have to get some of these guys off the bench to get going. But the fact that the bench only scored outside of Lowry 4 points is ridiculous. That is not good enough at all to win games. And it's why the Heat lost this game. And what's got to be in the back of a lot of people's minds is the fact that now the Hawks have won a game. This is something that the Hawks kind of do when they get hot in the playoffs. And obviously it only happened once so far. But there shouldn't be a doubt in most people's minds that it could possibly happen again. They do have a lot of talent on this team. If Trae Young can get back towards he was in the playoffs when he went on that run to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago, and the bench continues to play this well, there's no reason why they can't push the Celtics pretty deep into that series.
Yeah, and again, just going off numbers in this game, I mean, another just eye-popping stat is 63 total rebounds for the Hawks as a team to the Heat's 39, and that includes 22 offensive rebounds. I mean, those are just glaring numbers that really doesn't happen in NBA games that often. Both things, 63 total as a team doesn't really happen, and 22 offensive rebounds is just absurd. Miami really should be embarrassed by that. Those are things like sometimes losing a game isn't that bad. You know, you played as hard as you could, whatever. But allowing 22 offensive rebounds and only getting 6 on your end, that's an effort question. That's a one question. They should be embarrassed by that. That's really poor, especially on your home floor. Those are things that just can't happen as a basketball team. Win or lose, you can't allow that to happen. I don't expect that to happen again for the team they play next, who's either going to be Chicago or Toronto. I don't expect that to happen again, but at the same time, Toronto is a team that plays really, really hard and aggressively. They're big, they're fast and strong. That could be a really bad matchup for the Heat if the Raptors advance, which presumably they will. I think they're a better team than Chicago, and they're playing at home. If the Raptors get the Heat, I could really see Toronto handling the Heat the same way the Hawks kind of did tonight.
I can see it. The last 3 teams left in the play-in on the East side are very unimpressive. I'm still going to pick the Heat, but I could definitely see that again because the Raptors are a much taller team than the Heat are, and that's just going to be the story with them. If they lose any game, it's just going to be size.
Yeah, I'm picking Toronto, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so I might have gotten this mistaken. Who do the Hawks play next?
The Boston Celtics are in the playoffs.
It is the Celtics. Okay, that's what I thought, but I wasn't 100% sure. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it will be an interesting matchup. I think the Heat Celtics would have been much more interesting just because they played each other last year in the Eastern Conference Finals. But it is what it is. The Heat, to me, and Slade, like you said, most people would have thought that the Heat easily would have won this game. So the fact the Hawks came away with it is pretty shocking.
Quickly, I want to touch on the Odell Beckham signing. So Odell finally decided to sign with the Baltimore Ravens for a 1-year, $18 million contract. Initially, my thoughts are this is a massive, massive overpay for a guy that just came off an ACL tear and he missed 2 seasons, almost 2 full seasons. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. And I don't really get why that's where he wanted to sign unless it was money was the only motivator for him because you don't even know if Lamar is going to be there week 1.
Yeah, I think money was the motivator here, especially because the Jets, I know that the Rodgers thing hasn't been decided yet completely, but it is fair to assume right now that Rodgers will be playing there. I think that would be a better situation than going to the dumpster fire that Baltimore is right now. With the whole debacle they have, the Roquan Smith thing was handled poorly. Or, I'm sorry, they actually handled that well. Chicago handled that poorly. But everything that's been happening there and all the turmoil from this offseason, I don't really understand why you would want to get into that mess. We've been saying this too the entire time Odell Beckham has been in the news. He's not a number 1 receiver anymore. I think that was evident before the ACL tear, and now you add on the ACL tear. And I think at this point in his career, you are making such a desperation attempt to get Lamar back, and then you may have just handcuffed yourself even more because paying this guy $18 million, how does that move the needle for a guy like Lamar Jackson? It doesn't really make sense, and then you paid him all that money for nothing, in my opinion. I think that it just reeks of desperation.
Yeah, it definitely does. But what is interesting is the fact that Odell had been linked to the Ravens before, and a big reason for that was because of Lamar. So maybe, like you said, this could be a push for the Ravens to try to keep Lamar, saying, hey, we're making an attempt to sign weapons. And you mentioned the fact that Odell is not a number 1 anymore, and it was evident before he got hurt. What is interesting is how well he played for the Rams when he got traded to when he got hurt in the Super Bowl. And he's a big reason why the Rams made it to the Super Bowl and ended up winning that game because of how well he played before he got hurt. So it will be interesting to see how he recovers from this. Obviously, this is not his first lower body injury. He's dealt with hamstring issues before. Not ACL tears, but definitely injuries around the ACL, his ankles. He's been hurt before. So maybe this gives his body an extra year to rest on top of recovering. Of course, when you go through physical therapy, it is not easy. People tend to think that when you go through an injury and have physical therapy, it's easier on your body. You have a chance to rest. If you're an athlete, physical therapy is tiring. It's laborsome. It's very monotonous and boring. So trying to get through that is very hard, especially where Odell is at this point in his career. So it'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back. But I think that you can only bounce back if Lamar's still on the team. So I don't think the Ravens have a direction without Lamar. So this signing won't make a lot of sense if they get another quarterback that's any less talented than Lamar. And considering how talented he is, there's a pretty good case that whatever quarterback they bring in, if they bring another one, will be nowhere near as talented as Lamar Jackson is.
Yeah, that receiver core in Baltimore is just so unimpressive to me. It kind of reminds me of the Patriots receiver core this last season, like where it's just a bunch of like second and third options strung together.
Yeah.
It's definitely not going to be enough for him to like want to be committed to coming back. So we can move on to back to basketball MVP cases. Me personally, I'm a very firm Joel Embiid MVP, but I really don't see the argument for Jokic. Maybe one of you guys less biased can help me out with this.
I mean, I guess I'll go first since I was on the Jokic train for a while. At this point, to me, it's pretty evident that Embiid's going to win. And to me, it's rightly so. One of the things I talked about, and again, this shouldn't be a factor in MVP, but it always is how your team finishes. Well, considering that the Nuggets were the 1 seed in the West and finished with only 52 wins compared to the Sixers' 54 in a much tougher Eastern Conference, and the Sixers still finished third, that right there tells me about what Embiid had to do. And that's before you consider the fact that Harden was hurt at certain points for long periods of time, that Maxey was also hurt. So there's two of your big three that was down for a while. Embiid stayed relatively healthy the majority of the season, which he's never been able to do. And the fact that the Sixers on multiple times this season went on 8-game win streaks in a row and won 7-game winning streak in between that. That right there tells me that Embiid was carrying for a while, that the Sixers were much hotter team than the Nuggets were, and again, in a much tougher conference. And the Nuggets completely collapsed at the end of the year, too. And we talked about before with recency bias in NBA MVP voting, that is going to be a huge factor because there will be people that will say, oh, the Nuggets completely tanked at the end of the year, and they only finished a game above Memphis, who they've been a complete debacle in the last month with John Morant and everything that's happened around them. So the fact that the Grizzlies were able to keep it together enough to finish just 1 game behind the Nuggets, that's also got to be a bad sign for voters. So it's really just the last month has completely turned the tide. The odds betting favorite is Embiid, and I think that is the correct decision.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. When I saw that the record for the 1 seed in the West was 1 below the 3rd seed in the East, that kind of did it for me. If you put any of those top 3 seed teams in the East and move them to the West, they would easily be 60 wins, pushing like almost 70 if you're like the Celtics or the Bucks too, which is crazy to think about. But it's just crazy to see how the West has deteriorated in the last couple of years. I think that was the one thing that was holding Jokic's MVP candidate aside from the near triple-double stat that he put up all year. And now that the record is not even as good as the top couple teams in the East, despite being the 1st seed in the West, that does it for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what does it for me really is the level that Giannis and Embiid played at in the second half of the year. I'm talking post-January, I'll say. Jokic just didn't play at that same level. I think Embiid and Giannis were on a tier of their own during that stretch, and I think that's most important when we're talking about MVP is what did you do after December? What did you do after January? What did you do pushing down the stretch, the end of the regular season? I don't think Jokic, although he played really well, I don't think he was on the level that Giannis and Embiid were on.
With team success, when you look at the individual players between Embiid and everyone else, Embiid averaged 33.1 points per game. That was nearly a point higher than the second highest player, which was Luka. Embiid also played well throughout the entire year. Jokic, to me, the biggest reason why I had him so high was because he was averaging a triple-double. And the fact that he only averaged 24 points per game, he needed that triple-double in order for me to keep that vote. Well, his assists fell a little bit under that. They were 9.8, which is still very, very good. And that's not knocking the year that Jokic had. But to me, it's just not what he needed to do in order to be the MVP running for me. And the other thing, too, is that as great as Giannis played, he was the 5th highest scorer in points per game. He was 2nd in rebounds per game. He didn't lead any categories either. So the only guy out of the 3 of them to lead any categories is Embiid. And it's the scoring one, which in today's NBA, scoring is the most valued part of your game. So the fact that Embiid was able to do that as a center, that also elevates his standing as my MVP.
Yeah, agreed. And just the fact that Embiid had that insane level of scoring with the splits that he shot at by a center. It's unheard of, and we've been saying this all year too. The way that Embiid can score, and he can do it on all three levels, off the dribble, fading away, in the post, taking it at the top of the key. Like, he scores at all levels, almost like a guard at the top on the outside, and then when he's in the mid-range, he's unstoppable. It's like a Kobe or MJ mid-range, because he is so tall that no one can block it or even really contest it all that well. For Kobe and MJ, it was the elevation they got, the way they were able to create space. But Embiid does the moves, and he doesn't get as much separation, but he doesn't need as much. And he's so big that he's able to touch it over every single player that tries to guard him. I mean, Embiid dominates games on both levels. And I think the only player in today's game that can do it like Embiid is Giannis. That's why I have them as the final two in the running for MVP. And, I mean, when you talk about those two, it's a really, really tight race, especially this year. But just like you said, Aiden, Embiid leads the league in scoring. Giannis doesn't really lead any categories. He doesn't have as many 50-point games, or 40-10, or 35-10. I just feel like Embiid has put up more MVP performances. That's why my vote would lean to Embiid.
Yeah, the only reason I'm shutting down Giannis for being MVP is because he missed a little too much time, and he didn't get hot until like the second half of the season. So, and quickly before we move into baseball, I just want to touch on the Timberwolves situation. So right now they're playing the Lakers, and they're at the 256 marker in the first, and the Timberwolves have a 1-point lead on the Lakers. The main story with this team is the Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson fight, and Jaden McDaniels breaking his hand. My original thoughts to this are just like, this seems like a really immature team to like break down like that at the very last game of the regular season. Not lose one, but two of their guys for their most important game of the season, and air all their dirty laundry out like to the audience in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Butler warned us of this. The Timberwolves just have bad leadership. I think it comes from the top down, but I mean, there are a lot of players that are not to blame for the specific situation, but there are a lot of players to blame for why situations like that happen. And I think that a situation like this, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg in the sense that there's probably a lot that goes on that we don't see or hear about. Karl Anthony Towns is a great player, and I don't want to knock him for anything that he does on the court, but at the same time, his teams have been mediocre to below average, and I think that is a knock on his legacy a little bit. I think that he could thrive on a team where he isn't the number one option and he isn't asked to be the leader of the team. But at the same time, a player of his caliber shouldn't be asked to do that, if that makes sense. So I think that his personality and his leadership qualities, I think they hold him back.
Yeah, and this is an off-topic note. Obviously, when the D'Angelo Russell trade happened, a couple months before, it was very obvious, he was checked out with the whole team. He unfollowed the team on Instagram, and, you just saw, he was waiting to get out of there, and when he finally did, he wasn't, holding back how he felt. He talked about the leadership. Obviously, we said it before, I think going after Rudy Gobert and the way they did it made zero sense, but, this was their really dumb way of saying we're all in and trying to win right now. But they really just handicapped themselves, because they had to get rid of D'Angelo Russell, and who knows if Anthony Edwards is going to stay at this point. Karl, I don't think you can really defend him and say that he is a leader of a basketball organization when stuff like this happens on the team, when his own best friend can get checked out and want to leave, and his teammates have fights on the sideline, and Jaden McDaniels can't control his frustration. I do want to point out that the team was recently acquired by Alex Rodriguez, who doesn't have a lot of experience, and it's really showing. They just need a whole makeover top to bottom.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the most disappointing part of this, as bad as the Gobert fight was, the fact that Jaden McDaniels is out because he punched a wall in the same game, that to me is the more disappointing thing. Because guy numbers player fights happen. look, you don't want a fight to happen in your team. Obviously, that means that there's some major dysfunction. But it does happen, and especially when you're a team like the Timberwolves who really didn't play up to the expectation that they set for themselves this offseason when they got Gobert. It's obvious that there was going to be some frustration. But the fact that you get taken out of the game for, I believe he was ejected for 2 flagrant fouls, and then you get so mad right before a playoff game that you punch a wall. Like, what are you doing? Your team's dysfunctional. Like, that was pretty obvious with the whole fight that there had been issues the entire season. So you decided the smartest thing to do is to take yourself out of the game and make it harder for your team to win. That's just not thinking at all. Because, again, when it comes to fighting, there's at least some thought that goes into it. You're saying, hey, I'm really frustrated in this situation. Maybe I'm not going to handle it well, but at least I'm going to make a decision. When you punch a wall, you're saying, I don't care about anything. I'm not thinking at all. I'm just going with my first physical reaction.
It reminds me of the last game of the regular season for the Green Bay Packers when Quay Walker pushed the medical training guy and he got ejected. Like, it was just a senseless, can't control your emotions, like, very selfish thing that you could have done that really cost the team major, because now they aren't only just down Rudy Gobert, they're also down their best defender and probably the best defender in the league for the rest of the postseason, which is a terrible blow because they suck on defense.
Right, because again, at least with Gobert, yes, there was a fight, but even if they lose this game, they'll have another shot at a play-in game, where now for McDaniels, he's done. Like, done. I just don't, to me, it was just stupid. It made no sense, and I feel like because of the Gobert Anderson fight, nobody is talking about giving as much attention to McDaniels as he should be getting for his idiotic decision.
So we can move on to the MLB now. The biggest storyline here is the Tampa Bay Rays are still undefeated. They beat the Red Sox today. And just initial thoughts, do you guys think this will last? Do you think they're a serious shot for winning the World Series this year?
I mean, obviously they're not going to go 162-0. We all know that. But I'm totally buying into this Rays team. Their lineup is really hot right now. I mean, you could call this, luck at the beginning of the season or whatever, but I do believe that there's consistency there. I mean, they have 7 guys hitting over 300 right now. That's obviously not sustainable, but when you look at guys like Wander Franco, Brandon Lau, Randy Arozarena, like, those are guys we know that can do that, hit around 300 for an entire season. And then Yandy Diaz is having a great season. Isaac Paredes is having a great year. Josh Lowe is having a great year. I don't think that those guys will necessarily be at a 300 level, but they're going to be productive players. I love that. They're getting great pitching right now. I mean, I'm not sure how sustainable that is. Like, Pete Fairbanks is doing really well. Shane McClanahan is off to a good start. Their bullpen as a whole has been good. I'm buying in on this Rays team with how slow the Yankees have really gotten. The Rays are really looking like the best team in the AL East right now.
Yeah, 100%. The thing is, for me, they have the pitching. If you look back at their last 4 games, they allowed only 2 runs, and 3 of them were shutouts. So this is something that we see, like, with teams like the Phillies, they have all offense, no defense. Like, it doesn't cut it. So now when you combine great hitting with lockdown pitchers, like, it's a recipe for success. And I don't see why they don't keep it going at a very similar rate moving forward in the rest of the season.
Yeah, the only reason why I'm a bit hesitant, and I know that 11-0 was an amazing start, and it doesn't really matter who you played, but they have played some of the worst teams in baseball to start out the year. And obviously there's nothing they can control about that. That's just how the schedule worked out for them. But playing the Athletics, playing the Washington Nationals, playing the Detroit Tigers, it does make it a little bit easier to start. Now, the Red Sox series, the fact they won both those games to start, that's pretty impressive considering everything that's happened. What I'm interested to see, if they can stay as productive in the starting pitching as they had with how high-powered their offense is. I don't know if you guys have looked at their May schedule yet. It's not easy. It starts out with a 3-game series against the Yankees, then 3 games against Baltimore, 4 against New York after that, 3 against the Mets, 3 against Milwaukee. And then 4 against Toronto after that, and then 3 against LA, and then the Cubs. That's a tough month of May for them. So if they can get through April as hot as they are, and keep this into Memorial Day, which is when standings are first really looked at and scrutinized, if they're still in first place by then, I have them as almost a guaranteed lock to at least make it to the ALCS, if not win the American League.
Yeah.
If they struggle in May, then there's going to be more talk. So I think that what is happening is amazing, obviously. It's very historical, the fact they're 12-0. The fact that they've only lost or won one game by less than 4 runs is unheard. Like, that is almost never happened before. I believe that there was a team that started out 8-0 with having, or sorry, it was like 14-0 with winning every game by 4 more runs. So they won 1-0 against Boston. But besides that, every other game's been a blowout. So they are in a historical pace to start out the year. But I want to see how sustainable that is when they play a very tough part of their schedule later in the early part of the season.
The toughest thing for me about this May schedule is they play 29 games in 31 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really tough. And
yeah.
Like Aiden was saying, like, that's just a brutal schedule, you know. I mean, you know, another part of that is the 3 against Baltimore, 4 New York Yankees, 3 against Mets. That's all on the road. Mm-hmm. So that's 10 straight on the road there. Yeah, and you have to go to Chicago too. That's really, really tough. We've seen how good Milwaukee's been this year. That's going to be the real test for Tampa Bay, and I'm excited for that stretch. That's going to be fun to watch. I mean, that's a lot of good baseball. I'm trying to see if there's any Sunday nighters. It doesn't look like it. That's kind of the thing with MLB is I feel like they miss a lot of good matchups for Sunday night baseball. Like they miss the ball on some primetime games, and I think that hurts viewership sometimes.
Are they not like the NFL where if a team comes out of nowhere, they'll switch the schedule around?
Nah, they don't do that.
Okay.
Which is, yeah, I don't agree with that. But, yeah, I mean, that's going to be the real test for them. I'm looking at the whole schedule, too. That's definitely the toughest month. You know, they do have some other tough games. Like, they have to go to San Diego. They play Atlanta. That's at home. I mean, obviously, they play in a tougher division, too. The AL East is a tough division. You know, their division games... They don't really have a Washington Nationals that the Phillies, Mets, and Braves have. That division as a whole is good top to bottom. Like the Red Sox are definitely not a rollover team. And then you know, Baltimore, Toronto, New York Yankees, Rays. Those are all 4 really tough teams. So the schedule as a whole is tough. But I think we've been saying this since the beginning too. The AL East is a division that'll send 3 teams to the playoffs most likely.
Mm-hmm. At least 3.
Yeah.
I'm thinking 4.
Yeah, I mean, they could take all 3 wildcard spots from America. Definitely.
I just don't. I don't think the Central is good enough. And to me, what other 2 teams in the West would get it? I just can't.
Yeah,
maybe
right.
Seattle, but they've been terrible to start. Mm-hmm. And think about it, Baltimore is like a game under another game over 500 after tonight, so they're 6-5, and they are more talented than the 3 bottom teams in the AL West. And again, the Central could have had a couple of teams, but I just not seen the White Sox at this point. And maybe the Twins pick it up enough, but I just don't see it out of them. I think that it's Cleveland's division to lose at this point.
Yeah, agreed. I didn't realize how weak the American League is. Like, there's a lot of mediocre teams here, and like, it doesn't help them that Houston has started off so sluggish too. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure they lost again today.
Yeah, they're 5-7 right now. Yeah. I mean, to me, look, the Rangers swept the Phillies, and after that, have gone 3-4. Yeah. So they're coming back to earth. The most disappointing team to me has been the Angels by far. Uh-huh. It's because it's the same thing that's happened the last 3 years of Trout and Ohtani carrying them to big leads late in games, and then they're blowing them in the bullpen. They were up 4-1 last night and then lost 6-4 to the Nationals. Before that, they were up big on Toronto and lost that game. So in back-to-back games, they had huge leads, games they should have won, and they still lost.
The biggest disappointment for me this year has been St. Louis Cardinals. Like, I think they have enough time to turn it around. I did predict them at 88 wins, so like I didn't think that they were getting over the 90 threshold, but at the same time, they don't even look like an 85-win team right now. We obviously have time to turn it around. Like, we're talking big hypotheticals here, you know, even discussing the Rays. But, I mean, starting off this slow and the issues that they have, which is kind of similar with the Phillies, is, man, the bullpen and the pitching as a whole has just not looked good. It hasn't looked sharp. Mm-hmm. Those are problems for concern. they do have Jordan Walker, who has been tearing it right now. I'm going to see if he had another hit tonight, because that would extend it to an 11-game hit streak. Yeah, he had another hit. So he's at an 11-game hit streak to start the year. I mean, that's really impressive. And we haven't really seen a rookie do that, come on that strong in a while.
Yeah, you were talking about the Phillies. How about Luis Ariz going for the cycle today?
Oh, yeah,
Did you see that?
Yeah,
first cycle in Marlins history. So, the Phillies are struggling. The Marlins, the fact that Alcantara pitched so badly, but he just historically does not pitch well against the Phillies. Yeah. So I think he'll be fine. He was great in his first 2 starts. So I think it's just, for some reason, the Phillies just have his number. But they can't ever beat the Marlins outside of when Alcantara pitched, which is basically the opposite of every other team that plays the Marlins.
Yeah.
The team that, as much as everyone's talking about the Rays, I am really impressed in what the Arizona Diamondbacks have done.
Yeah.
Because how the Rays started off with a really easy schedule, the Diamondbacks had to play the 2 teams from the West that made it in the playoffs last year, in the Dodgers and the Padres, in 2 series, and then started a series against Milwaukee. They've won 4 straight, including 3 out of 4 from the Dodgers. They split the San Diego series and split the LA series to open the season. So they are playing well to start. Now, there has been times before where the Diamondbacks have gotten off the hot starts and then slowly as the season's gone on, sort of faded out. So it'll be interesting to see if that will happen again. But at this point, it is exciting to see that there is some reason to be hopeful for the Diamondbacks, because that just has been the case for a while for them.
Yeah, right. I mean, they haven't had a true contender in 20 plus years. So I love when the Diamondbacks are good. Like, I think that they have really good potential with their jerseys. Like, I don't like the ones that they have now, but obviously those throwbacks are really nice. So I like when they're good, because I just like seeing them with their uniforms in the playoffs. That's kind of just a personal thing. But yeah, I like when Arizona's good, so I'm rooting for them hard. I love Ketel Marte. He hasn't necessarily lived up to the potential he was getting at the start of his career, but he's still a really good player. I love Rojas. I think he's super underrated. And they added Evan Longoria, which is kind of went under the radar, but that's a pretty good sign for them, just in terms of veteran leadership and presence for a lot of those young guys. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, and their pitching staff, too, with Zach Allen, who pitched really well last night. You've got Bumgarner, who has not pitched well since he signed with Arizona, but if he can settle down a little bit, and you have Merrill Kelly as well, that's not a bad 1-2-3 if Bumgarner can pitch a little bit better than he has since he's been there, and Gallen pitches as well as he did last night.
I don't think that their lineup can necessarily hold for the whole season to get them into the playoffs, but I think that they'll put up a really good fight. I just think it's going to be tough with the top 5 teams in the National League. They're like, I don't want to say the Phillies are set to make a playoff spot, because they just haven't looked like it, and even the Mets, I don't think the Mets have even necessarily locked up a playoff spot yet, but I think Braves, Dodgers,
definitely,
Padres, I think that those teams have proven that they are going to be in the playoffs again this year. So it'll be tough for Arizona.
What I think the Diamondbacks could do this year, because you're right, it's still early, they're not a lock for the playoffs, but what they could do is be a spoiler in the West, where if San Diego or LA are sort of on the fringes of a wild card, because chances are one of those 2 teams will sort of fall back a little bit more than they did last year. If one of those teams are on the fringes of the wild card, these games against the Diamondbacks be really important.
Yeah.
And the Diamondbacks could potentially be season wreckers for one or both of these teams.
Yeah, agreed. That'll be really interesting to see. And I mean, I love in, April, when we're looking at like crazy things, like you just talked about Arias for the Marlins, who hit the cycle. He's hitting .537. And I mean, there's just some teams here who I don't think that they'll be where they are right now when we end the season. Like the Rangers, 6-4. Yeah. And then like Pirates are 7-4 right now. Like, I think it'll be funny to see, in August and September. I think that at least for those 2 teams, Pittsburgh and Texas, I think that they'll be in the bottom. Yeah. But Arizona's the one team that like they came from the basement, and I think that they will be staying towards the top. Like, I don't think that they'll make the playoffs, but I think they're going to be knocking on the door like pretty loud.
Yeah, as the old saying goes for baseball, you don't really start looking at standings till after Memorial Day.
Yeah.
But as you said, it is fun to look at them. And I try not to take standings too seriously because there are a lot of overreactions when you're only 6% of the way through the season, 6.5%. But it still is interesting to see what teams have made some improvements early on and if those adjustments can stay.
Yeah.
Because there's occasionally those teams that get hot early and you think, oh, maybe they won't do that well. But then they stay around 500 for the majority of the season and then get hot late in the year or they tank. Yeah. So because Arizona could have been a potential seller at the trade deadline. Well, if they stay around 500, maybe they're a buyer then. So, and another old baseball cliche, you can't win, you can't make a playoff spot in April, but you can certainly lose a playoff spot in April. And there are some teams that looking like they are losing playoff ground quickly, teams that we thought were going to be competitive. Obviously, nobody thought Oakland would make the playoffs. No one thought Detroit would. But the fact that the Phillies are 4-7, that's pretty shocking. The fact the Cardinals are 3-7, also shocking. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of teams right now that are struggling, and they have time to figure it out. But with how competitive those two divisions are, the NL Central not so much, but you still got to worry about the Brewers and Cubs, and the Pirates have been hot too early on. So that's three teams that you're going to have to fight your way out of. And with the Phillies, there's another three teams that you're with. And the fact you're on pace with the Washington Nationals is just not a good sign at all for them.
Yeah.
So these teams have to figure stuff out quickly or else things could go south in a hurry.
Yeah, I've said this to Jack before a lot of times, like just what you said pretty much. April is a really important month. You know, it might seem a little less important because there's a lot of season left and stuff, but these are important games. You can't be having too many slip-ups because you might be 2-3 games out of a playoff spot in September and not that many games left to make it up, and you're like, damn, I wish I played a little harder back in April and May when I thought the games weren't as important. Like, you can't be thinking like that. These are really important games. You just have to focus on the next one ahead of you. It's really hard in baseball, but you're right. It's not good for a lot of these teams to be slipping up ground this early.
Yeah, that's all I have for baseball at this point, but we will definitely keep your eye on as some of the other seasons wind down and baseball starts to heat up.
Yeah, so before we wrap up here, we could just quickly talk about NFL draft and where guys are projecting and stuff. But I'm seeing a lot of noise for the Tennessee Titans trading up to the third spot and drafting Anthony Richardson, which is kind of raising a couple eyebrows for me because they just got Malik Willis. But I don't know. They're in such a weird position. They've been releasing so many key guys from their last year's run, and who knows if Derrick Henry's going to be there. Having 3 quarterbacks on that roster that like could start would just be kind of weird. It gives off like San Fran vibes.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this year in the top 10, most of the teams are going to stay put. I think if there is a trade, someone will trade in from outside of the top 10. I've been seeing people saying the Colts want to trade up. I don't see that happening at all. I think the Colts want a QB, and I really don't think there's any sense in giving up assets to jump the Cardinals, who are not going to take a QB.
Would it be the worst thing if they started Gardner, though?
Colts? I just don't think Gardner Minshew has it. I don't think Gardner Minshew is enough to be a starter. I think you have to put your team in a new direction. I think going for a QB gets you on the right track, at least to start. You know, I'm not saying you're going to get a new QB and then you're going to be close to the playoffs. Like, no, I think that you're going to need a QB this year. You'll probably have a top 10 pick next year. Look for a left tackle in the first round. I don't think it makes sense for the Colts to jump Arizona. If they want to possibly play with Houston or Carolina, they could. I don't really see either of those teams wanting to trade out and let the Colts take the QB they want. I think that the top 3 actually is set. And then I don't think Indianapolis wants to move out of that 4 because, like I said, they want a QB and they'll get the third best QB available with Arizona having Kyler Murray. And then after that, it's a lot of these guys like don't really want or need a QB. I don't see Seattle taking a QB right now.
They were thinking about it for a while.
Yeah, I don't see Seattle doing it. I don't see Detroit doing it. I think they like Goff, and that doesn't seem like Dan Campbell for me. It doesn't seem like Dan Campbell to move away from Goff after he had a good season. Raiders, that's probably the next team that is going to take a QB, and they might be really thin because I think after the top 2 QBs, it falls off pretty significantly.
It does. I think everyone's overrating Will Levis and Richardson.
I think Richardson will be good, but again, I think he's going to the Colts at 4.
Yeah. Well, there's like 5 guys that I think are definitely going to get drafted in the top 10, and it's the 4 quarterbacks we just listed and Will Anderson Jr.
Yeah.
Everyone else is kind of a toss-up. I think if those 5 guys go, I think Jalen Carter could be available in like the mid-first round.
Yeah.
Yeah, another name that seems to be jumping out a lot is Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech, an edge rusher. Yeah. I don't know too much about him, but it seems like that he's high on a lot of people's draft boards. Mm-hmm. The 2 mock drafts that CBS Sports has, well, the first one, he's going to the Raiders at 7. The other one, he's going to the Falcons at 8. So it's seeming like he's going to be a back end of the top 10, but he seems like the type of guy that is a consensus top 10 pick. The other one that's been named in both is Jalen Carter from Georgia. And we've mentioned him in about how he was part of that fatal car accident with his former teammate. So it is interesting that he's still top 10 because of the fact that teams tend to be hesitant about guys with sort of shady backgrounds like this and have been in incidents like this, but that doesn't seem to be affecting teams at all. So those 2 guys could also potentially be guys to look out for in the top 10.
I'm sort of surprised about Jalen Carter too. Like the news that came out that he wasn't taking any visits or interviews with teams outside of the top 10. That was a major turnoff for me. Like that gives me Ben Simmons vibes when he wouldn't work out for any of the teams in the NBA draft. That just really throws me off of Carter. I love Christian Gonzalez at 10. And a guy that I think isn't getting enough noise this year that should be is Nolan Smith from Georgia. He really impresses me on tape. His size is really good. He had a great year for Georgia, which was above and beyond the best defense in the country by far. I don't think he's getting enough noise. You know, he plays a premium position. I don't know what the issue is with him. Like, he's not getting, like you were talking about Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness from Iowa is getting a lot of buzz, but Nolan Smith just doesn't, and I think he's going to be a sleeper. Like, there are a lot of edge rushers in today's game that weren't taken very high. Like, a big one is TJ Watt was taken in the 20s. I think that Nolan Smith has a chance to be one of those guys. I think some team will wake up, though, in the top 20 and take this guy, Nolan Smith. There's no way he should fall beyond 20, but for whatever reason, there's a possibility it could happen.
The only other guy that I'm really eyeing on just because of potential storyline is Bijan Robinson, just because he is clearly the best running back coming into the draft, and running backs hadn't been drafted in the first round that often, although he is considered somewhere between 15th to 25th for a lot of guys that are looking at mock drafts. So the only reason that he would fall that much is because, again, running backs are not highly valued by teams that have top 10 picks because they have a lot of other needs. But it will be, to me, sort of interesting to see which team decides to get him, where he goes in the draft, and maybe if it could show that star running backs in college make a little bit of a comeback being drafted in the first round.
I mean, I'm a guy that is pretty firm on the fence of you really shouldn't take a running back in the first round. Again, especially with a running back class like this, it's very deep. You're going to find a lot of good gems of running backs in the 3rd and 4th rounds. I don't see the value in taking a running back in the first round. That's just my opinion. Like, I think that there are a lot of good running backs that have been taken high. Like, Saquon, I think, is a good running back. I think Zeke is a good running back. At the same time,
how much? Not great.
Yeah. And like, have they really impacted winning football that much? I don't think so. In today's game, especially, like when you need QBs, you need edge rushers, you need cornerbacks. Those are just more important positions. I think for every team, it's probably better to let Bijan slide unless you have another first round pick. Like if you have multiple, I think it's worth it to take a running back with the second pick that you have. This is just my opinion. I think I'd let a guy like that slide. And again, if you're on the fence with guys like you don't really like a set of players that much and you're just like, F it, I'm just going to go best player available. Like, Bijan is probably your guy. And I don't think that's a terrible move. It's just my opinion. Like, if you're scouting a guy hard from a premium position, I think that's just more important than going with the flashy running back.
So you mentioned teams with 2 first-round draft picks getting in. There's only 2 as of right now, and it's the Texans and Eagles.
Yeah, the reason I said that was because of the Eagles, really.
Eagles.
Yeah.
I can see the Texans maybe doing it, sort of going the same route that Jacksonville did and getting a star quarterback and star running back in the first round. And obviously ETN played. I am blanking on Jacksonville's quarterback's name, and I feel really bad about it.
Trevor Lawrence.
So, yes, the fact that ETN and Trevor Lawrence played together in college, that obviously helped Jacksonville get both of them. Where Robinson and whichever quarterback they go with, it's seeming at this point it will probably have to be C.J. Stroud because a lot of people seem to be thinking that Bryce Young's going first. I tend to think that Bryce Young will go first. Or, sorry, C.J. Stroud will go first, and they'll have to get Bryce Young. Whatever quarterback they'll get, they'll feel pretty comfortable about. So I could see them then going for a running back and sort of trying to build up their offense before they build up their defense, the same thing that Jacksonville did.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I mean, I want to talk about the first overall pick, too. I completely agree with you, especially, like, after all the buzz and the media attention that Stroud got after Carolina visited his pro day and, like, McCown said to buy a house in Carolina, whatever. I think it's pretty clear that the Panthers are going to go with C.J. Stroud at 1. I think that's the right pick, too. And I think Houston's getting a good QB also. I don't know about the thing with Houston that I don't think it would be smart for them to go with a running back like you were talking about the way Jacksonville did it. I just think like they lost their premium edge rusher to Cleveland this year for a really cheap contract. It was a dumb move by Houston letting him walk. I think that you have to be looking to upgrade your defense because as bad as your offense was, I mean, your defense was pretty bad also. And if you want to start building and putting this team on the right path to success, which the Houston Texans haven't really seen ever, you need to be looking on both sides of the ball because just getting Bryce Young isn't going to be enough. And just improving the offense a little bit, it's not going to put you on the right track, in my opinion. I think that getting defense and upgrading your defense in the late first round and then even in the second, third, fourth rounds, I think that they should be looking for defense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair argument. I'm not disagreeing with that. I just think I could see them going after him because you have 2 picks.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting. I do tend to agree. I think they should go defense, sort of build up your needs before your wants. Mm-hmm. But there's teams in the past. I mean, look, the Bengals went with their wants too when they got Jamar Chase, and no one's knocking them for doing that.
Yeah.
So it can turn out to be okay. I don't know if they get Bryce Young that I feel that confident in doing that, where I feel like if for whatever reason the Panthers go 1, which I've said before, I totally would disagree with that decision. But if the Texans can get C.J. Stroud, I could see them going for running back and feeling much more confident about that.
So I think that'll wrap it up for this episode. We always upload Saturdays at 2 p.m. So we'll catch you next week. See you.